The journey began October 3, 2011 in Newport, Rhode Island. After a great dinner at the Mooring and a good night's sleep at the Hampton Inn, we were off the next morning for a tour of the Newport mansions. The Breakers is the grandest of Newport's summer cottages and a symbol of the Vanderbilt family's social and financial prominence in the turn-of-the-century America. Cornelius Vanderbilt established the family fortune in steamships and later in the New York Central Railroad. The original Breakers was destroyed by fire in 1892. The next year, the current 70-room cottage was built. In 1972, the Preservation Society purchased the house from its heirs, and today it is designated as a National Historic Landmark. The grand entry with its beautiful staircase is still used today for charity events in Newport. The opulent dining room is just one example of the rest of the house. The cliff walk along the eastern shore of Newport is world famous for its natural beauty of the Newport shoreline with the architectural history of Newport's Gilded Age. A picturesque walk along the 3.5-mile cliff walk with crashing waves on one side of the trail and some of the most beautiful homes of the wealthy along the way brought us to our next stop, the Marble House. Marble House was the summer cottage of William Vanderbilt, brother of Cornelius, built between 1888 and 1892 at a cost of $11 million. It became the social and architectural landmark that set the pace for Newport's subsequent transformation from a quiet summer colony of wooden houses to the legendary resort of opulent stone palaces. We continued around Ocean Avenue, passing more of those opulent palaces until we discovered Fort Adams. The original Fort Adams was established on July 4, 1799, and functioned as an army post until 1950. In 1965, the fort was given to the state of Rhode Island for use as Fort Adams State Park. After a good dinner at the Black Pearl, it was farewell to Newport. Bright and early Wednesday morning, we headed north, picking up Tom in Manchester. A lunch stop in North Woodstock and a short shower interrupted our afternoon plans, so the unspoiled New England village of Littleton was our first stop. The oldest commercial structure in northern New Hampshire, the Littleton Grist Mill, established in 1798, and the adjacent covered bridge were great photo ops. The grist mill recently had completed restoration to once again produce flour and grains, only to be wiped out by Hurricane Irene. We continued to our mountaintop retreat, and what a treat it was. The owners had cleared the mountaintop and used the stones and logs to build their dream home. Not only did he build the entire house, but he built most of the furniture also. The drive up to the top was quite an adventure. It rose 1,000 feet with numerous switchbacks on the way. The instructions were to stay to the outside as to lessen the chances of getting stuck along the way. After days of exploring, the beautiful scenery around us, and quiet dinners at the house, some of us spent the evenings relaxing by the TV or the fire. The owners are building a small cottage to move to when the main house is rented. The scenery was magnificent. The sunrises were spectacular, rising over Mount Washington. We awoke in the morning to 26 degrees, so we scrapped the cog rail trip up to the top of Mount Washington. Instead, we headed back south, traveling through Franconia Notch State Park. The basin is a magical spot, a geological pothole carved in granite by a waterfall in Franconia Notch State Park. The sound of the rushing water falling into the clear pool and the play of the sun and shadows dancing on its surface are hypnotic. Millions of visitors have been caught up in its spell. But you don't have to be an intrepid wanderer to enjoy the sights. It's an easy walk from the roadside parking area, so even those just wanting to stretch their legs on a long drive can marvel. Continuing on, we traveled the Kankamangas Highway. It is often referred to as the best fall foliage trip in the U.S. It stretches 34.5 miles between Lincoln and Conway. A couple of photo stops along the way to admire the breathtaking beauty of the foliage and a stop at Sabaday Falls gave us a spectacular view of a double drop waterfall nestled within a narrow gorge. Heading back to our mountaintop retreat, we stopped at Franconia. The Franconia Iron Furnace is the only still standing iron furnace in New Hampshire, and it can be seen across the Gale River in Franconia. Friday morning, we headed east towards the Mount Washington Hotel. The hotel was completed in 1902 as one of the largest, most modern grand hotels in the White Mountains. At one time, there were 57 trains a day stopped at the hotel. It was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1980. Our first waterfall of the day was Silver Cascade, just east of the hotel. It is a series of waterfalls dropping down the side of Crawford's Notch, 640 feet. It is easily viewed from the road. A short stop at the Wiley House for more breathtaking views. The Wiley House was the site of an 1826 landslide which killed the entire Wiley family. The same area was totally cut off for several days after Hurricane Irene. Glen Ellis Falls was our next stop. Glen Ellis Falls is by far one of the best waterfalls in New Hampshire. It is easy to get to, has a well-maintained trail, signs that give you some of the history of the Glen Ellis waterfall and Ellis River, and above all, an experience that you won't forget. Glen Ellis has great water flow all year long, and the pounding water that you can not only hear but feel under your feet will remind you of the sheer power of the water at the Glen Ellis Falls. The falls disappear over the edge and plunge 64 feet below. Our lunch stop for the day was Mountain Smokehouse in North Conway, and then a stroll through the downtown area. You will find a wide variety of trendy shops, a real 5 and 10 cent store, Zeb's General Store, the historic railroad station, and a real steam engine. On our way back to the house, we came across two of New Hampshire's famous covered bridges. The Saco River Bridge, built in 1890 at a cost of $4,000, and the Albany Bridge. The original Albany Bridge was built in 1857 and destroyed in a windstorm months later. The current bridge was built in 1858 and restored in 1970. Leaving the White Mountains on Saturday morning, we stopped at Echo Lake for one last photo stop. Since the frost on our first morning, the colors had really popped and were just gorgeous. The sun rose over the Atlantic on Sunday morning in Gloucester, Massachusetts. An early morning walk along the coast to enjoy the surrounding scenery and off to breakfast. The morning was spent enjoying the beauty of the area along the waterfront in Gloucester. The afternoon was spent exploring in the charming little town of Rockport with its many interesting sights to take in. Monday morning, our travels brought us through Boston, heading for Cape Cod, stopping at Plymouth along the way to see Plymouth Rock and the Mayflower II. The Mayflower II is a full-scale reproduction of the ship that crossed the Atlantic in 1620. Our destination for the day was Sandwich on Cape Cod. After lunch at the Marshlands, a local eatery, Scott was able to take us on a tour around the village. The first stop was the trip to the boardwalk, 1,000 feet in length, crossing Mill Creek and the beautiful marshlands leading to Town Neck Beach on Cape Cod Bay. The village is a typical New England village, complete with its white churches and a grist mill built in 1640 and still in operation. Our stay for the next 2 nights was at the Daniel Webster Inn, the centerpiece of the oldest town on Cape Cod. The inn has been offering lodging for over 300 years. The adventure for Tuesday was to the island of Nantucket, 30 miles across Nantucket Sound from Cape Cod. The island of pristine beauty is 14 miles long and 3.5 miles wide. Cobblestone streets and an array of stately Georgian, Federal, and Greek Revival homes reflect Nantucket's town's history as a prosperous whaling port. Originally a booming whaling port, Nantucket has been named a National Historic District and has architecturally changed little since the 17th century, as a seaside cottage and old-fashioned lamps still line the streets. The Seamen's Bethel was built in 1832 for the many whalers who considered it a matter of tradition that one visited the chapel before setting sail. The New Bedford Whaling Museum is the largest museum in the country dedicated to the history of the American whaling industry. As we head back to the airport, we take one last look at New Bedford's large fishing fleet. The end is drawing near to yet another great vacation.